So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say that some people spend their entire lives dreaming and wishing, and here's an example of somebody that actually made his wish come true. So I think that deserves an applause. I would like to open the floor to questions regarding the book, regarding the journey. So if anybody wants to ask a question, please raise your hand and we will come and give you the mic. Yeah?
Hi, Lawrence. First and foremost, congratulations on this book launch, and I think he deserves another round of applause, guys. As a tech enthusiast myself, I have a question for you regarding smart cities, and I know that you are a big proponent of smart cities. What are your thoughts of the role of blockchain in smart cities?
Just another quick before I answer that, a big shout out. My publisher is in California, so I just want to give a shout out to Corey. Maybe listening to this online, etc. I know the time difference is about 11 hours, but him and his team, iAuthors, were a huge inspiration approaching me a year ago to write this book. So regarding blockchain, I think that what is evident is one of the things I've really found is that how the technology industry has had to also market. So when the word blockchain is known, a lot of people think about cryptocurrency and that aspect. But I'm going to go a little bit, not too heavy technical here, but blockchain is really about building something called an immutable trust, a way to share information in a trusted way that allows you to share whether it's currency, whether it's other aspects. So it sort of lost its luster a little bit because of cryptocurrency, but I think it still has a space in terms of how do you create a very trusted environment to share certain valuable pieces of information in a way that's encrypted and can be decrypted without being secure. So I don't want to get too geeky in there, but that's just my very high level of I think of blockchain. Still a very important point.
It's a great pleasure to be here. I have just a very simple question. I did not attend the first part of your speak. What brought you to Saudi Arabia and how do you fit with the society of Saudi?
It's a great question, actually. I'll start a little bit. In 2017, as the deputy, I had started a proof of concept on artificial intelligence solving homelessness. And Dubai approached me to come and talk on a conference. That was my first time in the Middle East. And from there, my wife planted a seed that if ever an opportunity came in the Middle East, we'd move. We didn't think that it would be Saudi Arabia. We hadn't heard about Vision 2030. In 2021, I woke up and a headhunter approached me, telling me about Vision 2030. That was my first knowledge of Saudi Arabia in about 2021. What was happening here, what was occurring. And it was October, I just became so fascinated. I started reading, hearing about all the different mega projects, the Vision 2030, the transformation of the country. And then 6 months later, the Royal Commission for ALULA, another of the mega projects, approached me and had a conversation. I thought that I've lived in 5 countries. It's time to broaden and test the skills and see in a new area. And my wife and I talked, and we said it would be an adventure. So we came with our 2 dogs. We have 2 Canadian dogs, 20 hours. We brought them to the kingdom. And she told me she wouldn't come unless the dogs were going to be allowed, and Saudi Arabia is allowing that. And I would say that after living in 5 countries, when we go back to Canada, and actually after tonight, I'm on a plane to New York at 1 a.m. today to a business trip. I think it's the most friendliest country I've lived in. Some of my colleague Hussam, who I work with here, Antoine is there. Some of the most friendliest people who have opened up their hearts to me. open up their hearts to my family, my colleague Fahad, Naif, wonderful people, taking me to the desert, showed me the culture, met some diverse group of people. There's so many nationalities here. It's the most digitally advanced country I've lived in. It's the most digitally advanced country I've lived in. And I've lived in the US, I've lived in Canada, I've lived in all cities. And it's now getting a recognition globally. And the way the country has opened up over the past few years in terms of the quality of life we have here is very, very high. So it's been a wonderful experience in the year I've been. I hope that answers. You have a beautiful country.
All right, so Lawrence, I've had the pleasure of knowing you on a personal level, and you've been very kind and generous with your wonderful advice to me. And I perceive you as someone very driven, someone who sets out to do something and achieves it. What would you say to somebody who may want to be as driven as you are, but might feel inadequate? What would you say to someone like that?
Thank you very much. I think it's all finding our passion, who we are, and then surrounding ourselves by good community, good people who believe in us, people who see where we're going. And I've had a lot of people in this room, even in the last year, who believed in me. And I think that once you do that, it creates a positive energy. And one of the things I actually talk about, and I've had thoughts, is that there is a vision I have of writing another book about leadership and kindness, because often we refer to leaders as very driven, we refer to leaders as very hard. But I think that if you have kindness, and if you ensure that what you're trying to do and what you're trying to encourage is not about you, it's about others. And there's a book I read, because we just came back from Japan and Alaska a few days ago. I read is that everybody should be a monk. And there's a great book, I think his name is Jay Feeler, who talks about mindfulness, empathy, and caring. So I think it's finding people who have humility and put you forward and talk about, and I know you and I have had many conversations. So I think that it's the driven comes with when people believe in you. And there's a lot of people in this room that believed in me. It's everybody today. And it's not done by me. I'm just a funnel to that. So I think through my journey, it's about love, character, empathy, and recognizing that as long as you have kindness and you smile and you surround yourself with positive energy, then anything can be achieved. And the measurement isn't a title. The measurement isn't whether you write a book. The measurement is that you have peace in you, are you happy, and are the people around you, they remember and they think of fondness, and you make them feel happy. And to me, that is the way to have a purposeful leadership. And it must be through kindness. But kindness doesn't mean we can't be driven, we can't be accountable, but it has to come with encouragement. And I'll say this is that organizing an event of this is not in a book. There's been many people involved. There's Studio Sahara, there's Eleanor's team, and my role I always felt was this, encouraging everybody who's trying to make Lorenzetti's book knowledgeable, right? So we would have calls with the publisher out of California time zones, people in different time zones. And I felt that my role was just to facilitate, to bring the experts in to do what they do. So find the purpose, find people who believe in you, and then let that kindness brighten through, and then the magic will happen. If somebody had told me I would be in Saudi Arabia 3 years ago, having a book launch, writing a book, I would say, interesting, but I don't know how we're going to pull that off. And it has a whole series of people that have made it happen. And I just feel extremely fortunate to be here, because people have shown me love and kindness.
Just one quick question on, since you're on the CTO side, what is your views on artificial intelligence? Is it something which is a threat, or is it something which is good for people?
If people also want to Google me, there is when I was in Toronto, a company, one of the big companies that approached called Sidewalk Labs by Google. And it was a viewpoint of how can you empower society. So I think government has to find a way of policies. Artificial intelligence has been around a long time. It's just marketed now. Generative AI, you now have essentially there. So it's going to be with us. I think government needs to play a role in setting some guidelines so that there's ethical behavior in how it's being used. There isn't bias or discrimination. So I think it's a good thing. As I said in Toronto, we were looking at AI in terms of data and how we solve homelessness. And as some people who live in the West, homelessness is a big issue. We have very, thriving cities, but when you see people sleeping on the streets, it's not a good thing. And we wanted to use data to look at the root cause of homelessness, jobs, social economic issues. So AI is here. I just think government needs to provide policies as well as guidelines. I don't really want to say regulations because I don't want to stop the private sector from innovating, but just guidelines. And in Toronto, we had a digital infrastructure strategic framework based on social, economic, environmental. We set to guide the private sector in the use of AI.
Hi, Lawrence. Thank you again for the invite. It's a great journey, and I can't wait to read it. I work in the digital transformation space, and I'm from Canada, and I have work related to women in tech across Canada. We conducted research, and right now I'm working on driving that agenda here in Saudi Arabia. So being part of the leadership team in different organizations, really concerned about inclusion, diversity, and equity, how are you driving this agenda forward for women in tech?
Well, I think in every place I've worked, there's context, and I think first is about learning the culture. And I work with a great group of Saudi who have been educating me on the culture of this country, the history of this country. But when I look at even where I work right now, we have some very tremendous women leaders. We have a leader who leads our government risk management, our audit in there. And I think it's creating a space where people feel safe and you can be a vulnerable leader. So I think that in the times that I've been here, the conferences I've gone and looking across, there's a lot of women in Saudi Arabia, certainly very well educated, articulated that. And I think over the next 10 or 20 years, you will see more of that. Taking the North American context, my leadership team were all women. When I took over, they were all women. By the time I left Toronto, my deputy of architecture was a woman. My deputy of infrastructure was a woman. I fundamentally felt that it was important because we're all raised by mothers. We came from mothers. And I always thought if my mother was alive, she's not anymore, would she feel that I was contributing to ensure that the voices? I have 3 sisters. So I think there's all around us. So anywhere where I can promote that, where I can support that, where I can be kind in that, where I can mentor that, I think that that's the journey within the cultural context of the country we live. And I think that we're seeing that. And in this room today, there's great representation, and we wanted to ensure that the invitation was diverse.
Hello? Okay, so once more, thank you very much for the invitation and congratulations on the book. So my question is some sort of curiosity, I would say, and also to seize the opportunity to benefit from you. But I would say, being a fellow African, are there any future projects that could, I would say, address digital transformation in Africa? I wonder if personally, I say this is curiosity. It is not any sort of criticism, but I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts and any plans to do something that addresses digital transformation in Africa.
What country in Africa are you? Morocco. Okay. I remember when I used to walk when I lived in Nigeria, I used to watch the African Nations Cup. And I would say to my parents that Africa seems so diverse, from the people in Morocco, Tunisia, to the people in South Africa. Like, we all looked at that. So as a continent, and I left at 11, as I mentioned. So some people may know, and some of my friends know, I'm going to put a bit of a personal journey. Well, part of the reason of coming to the Middle East was to be close to the continent of Africa. The last time I was in Nigeria was 21 years ago, up until about a month ago. I went to Nigeria for the first time for burying my father, and I saw my sister, and I saw my niece, and the last time I saw her, she was 3 years old. So my colleagues, some of that, they know that, and it was very emotional. And at LEAP this year, for some people, the fastest growing tech conference, a credit to this kingdom, in 3 years, 3x that conference. I decided to focus a lot of my time at LEAP with speaking with people from the continent, some of my social media. And so I think that Africa as a continent has a lot of similarities to Saudi Arabia. Most of the ages of a lot of people are under 35 years old, similar to this kingdom. Natural resources, extreme natural resources, all across the continent. And there's diversity. You know, one country is very different. In Nigeria, there are over 200 plus languages, different tribes. But I would say that, so that is the frontier. That is the frontier. And when I was last in Nigeria, one of the governors asked me to come back home as part of the diaspora. He said that, you know, why do all of you who go to the West and then you stay in the West, and for example, so you don't come back? So I decided that, you know, as the journey continues, the attention will for me personally, will pivot to Africa. And I will say that there's two or three sectors that are very, very strong. FinTech. Because in Africa, if you look at certain areas, I remember I used to work at telecommunications. They didn't go through the normal tradition. They jumped right to cell phones. So the banking system is being pushed by fintechs. There are more entrepreneurs in Lagos on fintech space that you wouldn't believe. And Amazon, Google, they're all there. My sister a month ago gave me an education on what is happening. And in December, I'll be in Lagos. So fintech is very huge. With that, it allows people to transact in the marketplace, because if you're in Africa in certain areas, there are people doing side hustles, right? And they need to transact, they need to sell things, they need to have social media. So the platform on a fintech, I think it's there. And the biggest investors would be in Nigeria and Egypt. Those are the two biggest. And the next component, I think, that may not necessarily will come there, and it's a space that people should watch: quantum computing. Quantum computing, once the price comes down, it will have huge amount of data, and it will take artificial intelligence to another. I have a friend who I went to do my master's in Toronto, who's educating me about quantum computing about 4 years. It's essentially supercomputers. So you see the race of a lot of governments building supercomputers now, and it's quantum computing. So in Africa specifically, fintech, you put quantum computing on that, you put a population that's 38, you put an economy that's in there. Somebody told me at LEAP, Nike is looking at 16-year-olds in Africa, because when they're 26, they'll be buying their shoes and the sneakers. So 1.4 billion people in the continent. So you've got the size, the age, the entrepreneurs, the hustlers, you put financial services and investors. Those are some of the points. I hope that.
Question?
Question? No. Would you like to ask a question? Yes, please. Thank you.
So I got a little bit away from tech, and it's very interesting title you choose, Rich's World, which attracted me actually because I work in interreligious and intercultural dialogue. So it's going to be a little bit sensitive question, and you have the right to say no. Between Nigeria, UK, Canada, and now Saudi Arabia, what was your most cultural shock? And what was a country that you felt more comfortable to speak about your religion or to practice your religion?
Number one, Thank you for that. No question is difficult because when I walked in the city of Toronto, they had 40,000 people. Every month I had to go in front of politicians and they used to ask me a lot of questions. So your question was that, what country out of all those countries made you feel comfortable to practice your religion in terms of essentially who you are? I'll go through a bit of a journey. So in 1982, I went from a country that I was the majority, specifically a black man, a black boy, and within 8 hours, I was in a country that I was now the minority in the United Kingdom. It was a shock as 11, it was a shock to my system, and part of that has the book. There were words that were being mentioned to me that I just could not understand. For example, people said, your English is so good, and I had to educate them. It was the British that colonized us. So I don't know what English is what we speak. I had to address things about, coming from, different areas. And young children, they have a viewpoint. So that was a shock. Even about the weather, the skin, I felt dry, I felt cold, I felt plain spots. As a religion, in terms of that respect, it was a country that had similar religion benefits, the UK, so there wasn't that huge transformation from that. So that was a big shock, and probably my age, it was a huge shock, having to sort of deal with boarding school. And I'm not sure if any of my friends who were from Britain here, British boarding school is an experience. It's an experience in British boarding school. They take you to meld you and break you and shape you in ways that could be positive. So that was a big shock. The next shock was I met somebody on a train and they told me about Canada. And specifically where my wife is from, Winnipeg, Manitoba, great place, but fluctuates from minus 32 to plus 32 Celsius. Cold. So on each of these areas, there's been a shock to the system. But I've never felt that I couldn't be who I am. I just had to be educated on race, on being a black man. That has been, it's less on the religion, it's the race I've had to educate. But I found that as my accents changed, at 15, I went from, hello, what is your name? How are you? I used to practice my accent before I went back to see my parents because I wanted to still integrate. It's harder. I can't talk with my Nigerian accent for too long because it's there. But I found that as my accents changed, I was treated differently. And I give an example. In Canada, I went for a job interview and I interviewed over the phone. And if my wife is here, when I met her in 97, my British accent was even deeper. And the person thought I was a white man when I came for the interview. So I sat in the lobby. And I'm digressing a little bit just to relate with change, which is about bridging walls. And when I arrived there, the person did not approach me because they thought Lawrence Eto was a different person, specifically a white man. So I waited for quite a while, and then I approached the person and said, I'm Lawrence Eto, I think I'm here. And the person wasn't horrible, it wasn't bad. It was just a shock because in Winnipeg, they hadn't seen many black men with an English accent. Winnipeg is 800,000, not a very huge city. So a lot of those areas really started to hit me on inclusivity. What happens if my accent was still deeply Nigerian? Would I actually have got an opportunity for that job interview? Because there was bias being created. So for me, I always found education, diligence was a way to bridge those barriers. And I picked an industry that I thought was up and coming. So I think being who you are, those are the shocks for me. In terms of my religion, I've never felt that in any country I've been through. But I'm generally very respectful of the countries that I've been. I find that it's important to integrate and learn, integrate. So coming to Saudi Arabia is learning for me. I never lived in a Muslim country. When I told people I was coming to Saudi Arabia from Toronto, I was surprised because there is a Western narrative that talks about this country. So when my wife and I go back, we try to spend some time to educate. And I think as more people get educated about what's happening in different areas, it removes barriers. And you can see she's here, she's got an abaya, she's only been in the country a year, she's loving it. So when I go back and I go back to my in-laws, I say to my mother-in-law, your daughter's in a Muslim country, she's fine, she's thriving. So I think it's just education. And but in my religion, I've never felt that, but I have felt that in my color.
If anybody has any other questions, Lawrence is going to be outside. So if any one of you still hasn't purchased the book, it's as well going to be outside. We have limited copies, so please go ahead and grab yours while they still have them. And he is going to be there to sign the copies for you guys. So he's going to meet you outside if you have any more questions. And thank you everyone for coming.
Oh, this is my chair. I just walked over. Let me switch. Just press the button. Yeah.